This video is going to be all about gold or chartreuse foliage, ground covers, annuals, perennials. These are herbaceous things or maybe woody things that act as just ground covers across the ground. But a lot of these things you're going to see in this video will die back to the ground in the wintertime, or they may be slightly rough looking in the wintertime, but they really, really shine in the garden. And I think they're an important component, especially if you have light shade or long shadow conditions, you know, where you get tree limbs that, you know, just kind of put shadows across the ground. Some of these gold things, and we use a lot of them in our garden here in Raleigh, North Carolina, really can come in handy popping out in the distance. I mean, as I'm looking out here in the garden, you know, behind the camera right now, the things that are really showing up on an early morning situation with cloud cover above me are these really bright gold pops of color out here. This is definitely not an exception to that. This is maybe one of the most asked about plants in the history of this project here in Raleigh. This is a St. Johns Wart called Brigadoon, and it was planted across the front of this purple foliage Loropetalum that's behind us, the Carolina Midnight Loropetalum, and it was allowed to just kind of roam across this whole thing. This is a very easy to control ground cover. We mow this to the ground. It's evergreen, but it looks kind of rough in the dead of winter, so we cut it to the ground. You can use a mower or a weed eater, or I typically will just take some head shears and cut it to the ground. But we've been able to come back in here and fill this bed back in over time. We used it kind of as a placeholder while we figured out what else we were growing in here. And now it's just kind of in a couple little disconnected gaps in this bed. So like other St. Johns Warts, this one will get a yellow flower on it that the bees absolutely go crazy for. We don't get as many flowers on this as we do other St. Johns Warts. It's just for whatever reason. And then when you put a yellow flower on yellow foliage, you're really not going to see it very much, but you will see the bees visit over here, and that's how you'll kind of know you have a flower on it. When it's coming out in the spring, it has kind of a pinkish new growth, and you can see a bit of that even now in midsummer. And then it fades to a really bright yellow or chartreuse color, and then slowly as the foliage gets covered up in the middle, has a bit more of green. I can always find a weed if I pull something back in this garden. But that is Brigadoon St. Johns Wart. Just like anything else, I'll take this opportunity to show you some maintenance. Again, the only maintenance we do on this is we mow it to the ground once a year, February, March, something like that. Here's a green shoot, okay? And if you see this in any of your variegated or yellow foliage plants, you want to get this out quickly. This will definitely outgrow that. It's got a lot more chlorophyll to work with. The solar panels are working much better on this one than that one, and it'll take over the patch pretty quick. That's actually, I think, is this the first green shoot we've ever seen on it? So in 5 years, that's the first time I've ever seen it. So there are a lot of plants that will do this much more frequently than this. So I'm not going to let that be a concern over buying this one, because literally that's the first one in 5 years. But we're going to jump around and show you some other interesting pops of color like this in the garden. This is Sum and Substance Hosta. This one comes out really vibrant in the spring. We're filming this in July, so it's lost a lot of that color, but you can still see that it leans toward the yellow side of green for sure. We also have one called Dancing Queen that does a similar thing. These have very, very large leaves on them, and so here in the South, these very large leaf hosta like this need some afternoon shade, and unfortunately that afternoon shade also kind of contributes to them losing a bit of that color overall. I think if I could have them out in the sun, it would hold that color a little bit longer. But this one, it gets just as big of flowers as it does big giant leaves on it. But there are a lot of gold or chartreuse colored hosta out on the market. Of course, there's 1,000 variegated ones as well, but this one right here just has that one solid pop of gold color, and I love these big giant tropical like leaves on it because they contrast so well with other shade plants, you know, darker greens, other variegates, other large leaf tropical looking things that we would have in our shade gardens. One of the absolute pollinator favorites in the garden is this Golden Jubilee Agistache. We've done a ton of different Agistaches in this garden project over the time that we've we've been here. This Golden Jubilee is one that's extremely reliable coming back. Again, when it came out of the ground, it was extremely vibrant, and it's lost a bit of that over the course of the summer, but who cares? I mean, it was just, it basically, for 2 months, it wouldn't have been flowering. It was one of the shining plants out here in the garden. And then the foliage kind of faded back toward green a little bit, but then it started flowering, and the pollinators and the bees absolutely all over it. And the other thing you'll see on one of these Agistaches is, despite the fact that the flowers aren't necessarily the showiest flowers. I mean, this phlox, obviously, you know, has more showy flowers on it. The Veronica in front of the camera and Gomphrena here, much more showy overall. You get this really crazy group of pollinators on these. I mean, really, you just get all these flying things that, you know, I don't know what the identities are, little flying wasp and things like that, beyond just having the bees on it. Also, the other thing with the Agistache is, you know, typically the deer and the rabbits won't eat them, which both are issues here in the Raleigh garden. This gold foliage amaranth definitely is on the list of bright things in the garden, and it comes with its own it comes with its own flower color that contrasts with it. A lot of times when we're using these gold foliage plants out here, we're putting it up against something that's dark green or something that's purple and making it, you know, giving it a backdrop so that it really stands out and pops. But these pink flowers on this one are absolutely amazing. You can go to someplace like Park Seed and get the seed for these. They're purple foliage ones and different flower colors, but this happens to be a gold foliage variety with pink flowers on it. We had it in a container originally. These can go from seed to 5 feet in height in a single season, and I expect it to back here over the course of the summer. It's got kind of pinkish stems on it, and then pink flowers, and then that gold foliage. These can be seedy in the garden, so, you know, be careful with that. We have a few annuals here in the garden that you know, have gotten seedy over the years. And now some we're reducing the numbers on, and some we're allowing to continue to be seedy out here. But you want to pull, if you do see them coming back, you know, you can identify them pretty early. Make sure you're just getting them out before they reseed again, you know, that next year, so it doesn't, you don't get in a pattern where it's able to just really produce a lot of seed over the years. But good choice. This is one of those feathered friends ajugas. These a bunch of introductions in this series of ajuga. Hope to go film with this breeder at some point in the future. There are several in this series that in the spring and in the fall are much more chartreuse or gold. Again, midsummer here, we're losing a bit of that. This one gets a pink flower spike on it. It's called Flashy Flamingo. And gets absolutely covered in flowers. So it just appears to be a pink plant for a couple of weeks, but the rest of the spring and into early summer, it's really very vividly gold, and will cover space in a shady area that stays kind of evenly moist. A plant we've really enjoyed this season is this Miner's Gold lamandra. This one is definitely an amazing plant, especially out on the West Coast. You know, these are hardy in zones 8 to 11. We're in zone 8 here in Raleigh, and sometimes these Australian plants don't necessarily like wet winters. So if I have this in the ground, I'm likely going to, you know, I have to really have very sharp drainage in order to grow this in the ground. That's true with a lot of South African plants, Australian plants. This is a really soft textured lamandra, and we'll have a different lamandra in a variegated video coming up. But the soft texture of this one's amazing. I got a spider in there that's like, what are you doing, man? Why are you moving me around here? I love this gold pop of color in this container against this silver back here, and the purple foliage on this basil that's up above it. It just looks really fantastic. I can control the drainage. I've got kind of a chunkier bark in this container in order to grow it here in our Raleigh garden, where we could potentially have, you know, 5 consecutive days with afternoon thunderstorms or something like that. This is not a place that lamandra would prefer, but I really am drawn to this plant. I think this one was just found in someone's garden in Northern California amongst other lamandra. It was just a sport of another one, but really I think this plant, even if you're buying this as an annual and don't want to try to overwinter it in some way, I think it's worth having for the season. It's probably about doubled in overall mass since it was put in 2 months ago, and it will continue out here right through the fall, and it could even through the winter, depending on the winter we have here in Raleigh. This is Carex oceamensis Everillo, or Everillo Carex from the Southern Living Plant Collection. One of my absolute favorite grass-like plants for the landscape. This is a shade lover. It's hardy in zone 5 to 9. Up in zone 5, they'll take a little bit more sun than they will down in zone 8 or 9. Beautiful chartreuse foliage in the spring that kind of makes way for a yellowish gold foliage. In the fall, in colder zones, it will die back to the ground a little bit, and you can cut them in the late winter. In the warmer zones, they stay reliably evergreen, and you can cut them back. I would cut them back every second or third year, not every year, because they're a little bit slow to come back from that. Definitely a shade plant, super tolerant of lots of different soils, slopes, dry shade, moist shade, but not wet shade. And again, hardy in zone 5 to 9. This is Everillo Carex, deer resistant as well. This is lime glow juniper, and this is horizontalis, which we think of as like blue rug juniper, which is really, really flat to the ground. Most of them are, but this one actually gets a little bit taller, but it's still a ground cover juniper. But you can see it has a tendency to be just a hair taller overall. So rather than being, let's say, 6 to 8 inches tall, I would be more like a foot to a foot and a half tall. So still pretty daggone low growing across the ground. These are going to need a lot of sun to keep this color, and most junipers are going to definitely be sun-loving plants. You're going to need 6 hours or more. Typically, folks are going to plant these on some sort of slope, and they do like well-drained soils, so that's probably a good idea overall. I tell you, these ground cover junipers, they can be their own worst enemies in the future. They tend to, every leaf that drops in there ends up becoming part of the mulch underneath the plant in the future. And where they like to be well drained, they end up collecting a lot of material underneath. So the occasional little bit of pruning and cleaning up underneath them is probably a good idea in the future, so they don't end up with root rot related issues. But imagine this planted up a little higher on the bank, and then something like blue rug or blue Pacific planted a little lower with that bluish green foliage. The two of them paired together potentially on a bank to at least create some sort of differentiation on the bank overall. But lime glow, what a color. Here's an Ogon variegated sweet flag. This is a plant, if you have a moist or even almost wet conditions, this is a perfect plant for that. We'll typically see these used in landscapes where they're planted near rocks so that they have access to moisture underneath rocks. You know, typically when you roll over a rock, you'll see moisture under it. Or down at Ram and Tom Giberson's house, they have them planted on all their stream banks and all their water fountains and any place where they have consistent moisture in the garden. You can plant this and it'll find its roots down into that wet space. And just look how showy these are. I would call them evergreen or semi-evergreen. In bad winters, they can be killed back a little more. This one's in the house here. It probably would have been knocked back a bit more than this. Really interesting habit. This one, you'll see maybe 6 to 12 inches, something like that in the landscape, but there are dwarf versions of these as well, of sweet flag, green versions and variegated versions, but Ogon tends to be a very popular one, and you can see why. You can see this entire group here, you know, how showy that actually is. This is one we've covered several times on the channel over the years. This is all gold juniper. It's a shore juniper. Blue Pacific is one that you may know that has a bluish hue to it and grows very, very similar to all gold. But we really love all gold. This is a show off in the garden. And where I'm talking about maybe layering in this ground cover, you know, when I'm talking about ground covers, doing different sizes and different, you know, this allows you to have a really flat growing plant. This one's less than a foot tall and just as wide as you want to let it get ultimately. You can control the width, however you want to control the width. This one's going to be less than a foot tall. You could use something like Sargent's juniper behind it that stays green year round, that gets 1 to 2 feet tall. So it would contrast with it in size slightly and in color and really allow the chartreuse color to pop on all gold. But we really love this plant. You know, full sun really, really shines. And then in the winter time, I found this plant really, really interesting because when the sun is on a low trajectory in the winter time, any side that the sun is striking stays really yellow and the other side loses a little bit of its color. It all ends up super bright during the summertime, but I've noticed this plant, if you were really thinking about orienting it toward the south, it really gets this crazy gold hue on it during the wintertime. This is a Sun King Aurelia. This plant is hardy in zone 3 to 9, so a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people watching this video, can grow this plant. It's herbaceous in most areas of the country, meaning it's going to die back to the ground in the wintertime and then come back from that. The longer the growing season you have, probably the bigger this plant's ultimately going to get. So ours is 3 by 3, but this is only the second year in the ground. So I expect it to be up here next year in zone 8 in Raleigh, you know, down here a little more in northern areas where the season is slightly shorter. It will eventually get a little white flower that becomes a dark colored berry in the future, inedible. Deer don't eat this plant. So it makes a really good shade, a really good plant for part shade or shade conditions in your garden. The more sun you can put this plant in, the more color it will hold during the summertime. So it tends to be this more lime green color, which is pretty typical of midsummer coloration on these, you know, on these chartreuse colored plants. But in the north, where you could put it out in a little more sun, you could keep a little bit more of that vibrant gold color that it initially leaves out with in the spring. Really easy, virtually no maintenance plant. It grows like this all summer. If it got too big, I'd take a limb off here, I'd take a limb off there. No big deal. It's gonna die back in the winter and be well behaved, come back from that very reliably every year. But that's Sun King Aurelia. If I was gonna do a video on purple foliage annuals and perennials, variegated, dark colors, red color foliage, variegated foliage, or gold foliage, I could do coleus. Coleus can be included in any of those videos. There's been so much breeding in coleus over the years. We've seen them become much more sun tolerant. We have quite a few coleus out in the full sun in our front garden out there that hold up extremely well, but they would definitely prefer, especially this type of color, would prefer part shade. And so these are getting a good amount of direct sun, maybe 4 hours, and then they're going into the shade later in the day, and it keeps this kind of yellowish green color to it throughout the summer. These will eventually flower. We actually prune the flowers back, and we've actually just pruned this one not that long ago. The deer and rabbits tend to avoid these, so that's another good thing about coleus. Just easy overall. I'm going to call them annuals, but you can take cuttings on them, bring them in the house, keep them over winter if you wanted to root some and hold them. We are lucky enough that we can go to big bloomers and get these in like packs. You know, I don't have to buy them as, 3 or 4 inch plants. If I did, then we'd be collecting these things and saving them over winter, because I don't think one of these plants is individually worth $6 or $7 or $8. But I do think, that, this is, this was likely a 4-pack or a 6-pack. That we got from big bloomers, and it was whatever it was, $4 or $5. So individually, I think they're worth $1.25, not necessarily $6. But there is a ton of breeding in coleus, and they're just such easy plants, especially if you have those kind of garden pests, like rabbit and deer in your garden. This is a Lysimachia that folks refer to as creeping Jenny, and very, very hardly anything more common in our gardens that we use, from things like hanging baskets and window boxes where you want something hanging over. Great container plant. We have it here between a lantana and a salvia, and there's one little volunteer vinca that's come up in the middle, and it's just, sticking out onto the sidewalk right here. This was a volunteer. We had a pot here that had some in it, and it hit the ground, and now we've kind of used it as our reserve material for our container planting. We'll come over here and just literally, you can grab a chunk out of this right out of the ground with a glove on and put it in a pot, and it will immediately start growing. Occasionally you'll get a green reversion in it like this that you want to take out. These are hardy in zone 3 to 10. For the vast majority of people watching, this dies back to the ground in zone 10. It'll stay evergreen throughout the winter. It can cover some space, and so it's probably best used as a container plant, hanging basket, window box, like I said, because if you put it in the ground, and you put it in the right combination of average moisture and part shade, or sun but not 15 hours of sun conditions, it can really take over a lot of space in a hurry. We find it pretty easy to remove, as opposed, there are a lot of other things that can get moving through the garden that are much harder to remove than creeping Jenny. So I don't really have a problem. You could probably just put a cardboard box on top of it and kill it over a short period of time, or put some foot traffic on it. It's not that tolerant of a lot of foot traffic, but Creeping Jenny, super common, you know, for adding this really bright pop of color to your garden. And it holds the color. You know, a lot of things I'm going to show you in this video kind of lose a little bit of that color during the season. This one tends to stay just as vibrant through the entire growing season. So there's really no way for us to film all of the gold options in a single video that you could use for perennials, ground covers, or annuals in your garden. But this is just some that you could use, you know, in your garden, and be on the scout for more. The actual purpose of this channel is not necessarily to show you things for you to copy, but get you excited about adding these bright pops of color in the garden, and then you searching for the ones that work well in your area to do the same thing. We have, again, spots in that back garden back there. You know, there's Florida Sunshine. Alyssium won't be in this video. It will be in the shrub version of the same video. But in the winter time, there is nothing brighter in our garden than that plant. And so it's just using these as tools basically to keep interest in the garden, whether it's long shadows or the winter garden, if it happens to be an evergreen one or whatever. So lots of other things. Gold sedum, we do not have one in this garden. We have actually a lot of sedum varieties, and if we shot all kinds of other videos for different color things, we've got a sedum for it, but I don't currently have a gold sedum. But that's definitely one that would be extremely, extremely common out in landscapes. And I'll wrap this video up with a gold foliage sage. This is pineapple sage, as people will call it. This one comes up kind of hidden down, you know, between a couple of plants here, and is a little bit greener, but you can see as it's getting up here in the sun, it's getting brighter and brighter. And by fall, this one kind of does the reverse order, where it starts off greener and gets more gold. By the time it blooms in the fall, this is a much later blooming salvia than we would, you know, the others that are in our garden. Some of our salvias bloom as early as March, and this one is typically October before it's in full bloom. It's usually under threat of frost as it's doing it. But this is a fantastic plant. This is a plant, it's definitely only hardy in zones like 8 to 11. And you got to be patient in zone 8. This is one of the last perennials to wake up. So I always say in the spring, you know, some of our perennials will just get right out of the ground and start blooming or doing whatever. This thing tends to linger a bit before it pops out of the ground, but it's incredibly showy in the fall because any color flower, it doesn't matter what color flower you put on that gold foliage. We saw that, you know, with a couple other things here in this video. If you put a flower on top of this color foliage, it's going to shine in the garden. And we also like to add things. If you're looking at this video and then looking at the shrub version of this video, or shrub and tree version of this video as well, you can see that you could put those things together and have something that's always in action, either for pollinators or for year-round interest or whatever it is. But the gold pineapple sage will definitely be on your list if you're in the southern part of the country. Thanks for watching the video.